Hey guys, Farid here once again, and welcome to my third mixing tutorial. This time about stereo placement or stereo processing or imaging, whatever you want to call it, in the mixing phase. Um, I've been getting a lot of questions on how I personally use stereo placement in my own tracks and how I use it together with checking how my tracks sound in mono to determine if everything sounds okay in terms of the stereo field or not. Now, obviously, this is somewhat of a more intermediate technique or intermediate uh, tool or concept. So, if you're still starting out in production, you probably would have to read up a bit more first on the more basic aspects or methods of production first. And obviously, even for intermediate or advanced producers, uh, this is one of the most, let's say, uh, subjective areas of production where you really have to use your ears. And basically, there are a few basic rules, let's say. But in general, you really have to rely on your ears to determine what sounds right and what doesn't. And personally, I still struggle with that, whether it be basses, pads, plucks, etc. I still struggle on what should go where in the stereo field. And as you hear in my tracks, some stuff is usually all over the place in terms of the stereo field. So I'm still working on that. But I'm just gonna be showing you what I know in this tutorial, and hopefully it'll be of some help to you. Now, what is mono? What is stereo placement? Basically, let's start with that. Stereo placement is basically knowing where to place each sound, whether it be on the left side or the right side of the stereo field or in the center, whether it's going to be mono, delayed, reverb, etc. Whether you're going to apply any stereo widening on it and all that kind of stuff. And basically, what you want at the end of the day is a balanced full sound. So if you have everything too wide, you're not going to hear any wideness at all because there is no centered reference. So everything's going to just sound like it's wide with nothing in the center. So you're not going to be able to feel the wideness anymore. In contrast, if you have everything in the center, then you're gonna end up with a lot of conflicting sounds in the same region of the sound spectrum, and you're not gonna have anything on the sides, and you don't want that because every sound is gonna be basically fighting with the other, and it's just gonna be a big mess. So the key is to just know what to place where and why. Um, Now, the why is usually just because it sounds good. But like I said, there are a few basic rules that do help with placing sounds in their best areas in the stereo field. Now, personally, for me, I find that stereo placement or placing a sound correctly in the stereo field is much easier when you first do proper EQing and do proper layering. So if you have, let's say, four or five pads that you're using in a track, the key is to actually EQ them properly first, or mix them properly rather first. Leave stereo placement out until you're actually done with all that compression, EQing, delay, reverb, and all that sort of stuff, and choosing the right layers. So choosing different textures of pads, for example, can help give them natural separation even without stereo placement. And then at the end of the day, you can start playing around with widening, for example, or panning different pad layers, etc. Now, for this tutorial, sorry I'm doing a lot of intro talking, but this is sort of to help pave the way for what I'm going to show you in this tutorial. For this tutorial, I chose to use my newest project that I'm working on, my newest original project rather, because I have a lot going on. But I chose to use an incomplete track. I still haven't finished this track, I'm still working on it. But I chose to use it because since this track and my last release track, which is Sungaze, which was last year, I believe, I did learn a lot, and I did use an almost new approach to mixing and especially stereo placement in this track than um, than I've used in my previous ones. And I've noticed a lot of errors in stereo placement in my previous tracks after I actually worked on this track. So this is hopefully going to be of some use to you. And basically, I don't really like to use the stereo knobs in FL Studio much. So these knobs over here, stereo separation knobs, and stereo merging. So basically stereo mono knobs. I don't like to use them much except sometimes on kicks or sub basses or some hi hats, etc. But generally, I don't like to use them because for synthesizers, usually have their own stereo knobs. So for Silent, for example, we have the stereo knob over here, and here for each oscillator. For Spire, oh wait, for Spire we have the wide knob here for each oscillator. It's different. And for Massive, I don't believe I have any Massive. I've used any Massive in this project yet, but or actually I might have. Just a second. Yeah, there we go. So for Massive, I believe it is in the voicing. Uh, yeah, so it's in the unison section, and if you just increase the unison to more than one or two, I believe, uh, you basically you're able to, play around with the stereo. And if you use it in the center, it's mono. And if you keep it in the center, I mean, it's mono. And if you have it at one, there is no stereo widening, I believe. So I'm still not too sure about Massive, but I believe this is the case. Anyways, I don't play usually with Massive much. I'm not a big fan of it. Anyways, so let's. In this project. I'm gonna show you how I placed my basses, and some of my perks as well, and then I'm gonna go into my pads, and then for the plucks, I'm actually gonna show you my afloat project right here because the plucks in the other project aren't finished yet, and I have only have one layer for now. So I'd rather show you the plucks I have in a finished project. So let's start. Now, as I said, for synths and for presets, whatever melodic sounds, I tend to use the stereo knobs and the synthesizers themselves. And I believe my friend Ju, he's a great producer, released on Enhanced as well. He's actually the one who told me about these knobs. I didn't used to pay attention to these knobs before, and by default, when you design a sound on Silent, when you init a preset, it's set to maximum by default, which is maximum stereo width. And if you have maximum on everything, it's not good because, like I said, everything's gonna be wide, which is really not what you want. So it's really a good start if you're designing your own sounds to just be careful with this knob and to adjust it and see where is the sweet spot for the sound, I guess. Now, if you're using a preset from a sound bank, it depends on the preset. This knob might be on the maximum or it might be anywhere between the maximum or minimum, pretty much. So if you'd like to change it, feel free. If you think it sounds good where it is in the mix, then keep it that way. But just by default, when you design a preset, it's on max. Just FYI. Now, for my drums, usually what I like to do is I tend to use the FL Studio knobs, but usually for the kick, if it's not too stereo, I mean, if the click of the kick is not too wide in the stereo field, I just won't play with this because I usually have a TP bass lane on the master which monos everything under 100 hertz, so it monos the low end, and the high end is fine because it doesn't really matter, to be honest. The claps, I do play with them. As you can see, there is some panning going on here, just to make sure all the claps give a centered impression. In general, give an impression of sounding centered, but each layer has its own, let's say, stereo placement. In a sense, the highs might be a bit to the right or to the left, and that's why I have some slight panning on them. For this clap, for example, I also added a stereo tools, which basically just here to mono everything under 500 hertz for this clap, because I felt that this clap was a little bit too wide, or too uncentered, let's say. What I usually like to have in my sounds in general, whether it be drums, synthesizers, or whatever, is each layer might be panned differently, or be placed differently in the stereo field. But together, I usually like them to sound centered. So, for example, if the most basic example is if I have a clap panned all the way to the left and another clap panned all the way to the right, and this clap in the middle, um, even though each clap is panned differently, my end result, my end, I mean, the end result that I'd like to have is if all claps together sound like they're balanced in the center, if that makes sense. So for this clap, I felt that the low end or the low mids were a little too wide, so I monoed them below 500, and this again depends on your ear, really, and how the clap sounds or how the layer sounds in the mix. For this one, I don't have any stereo imaging or stereo processing on it. It sounds fine as it is. And for this one, I also just have some panning, no stereo tools, nothing else, just some panning to balance the sound. So this is generally what I do for the drums. Now I'll just briefly go over the loops and my hi-hats here. For the hi-hats, for the loops, sorry, it's pretty much the same concept. I tend to like my loops a little panned. So there's some panning going on here. And if usually loops, if you use pre-processed loops or loops from sample packs, they will be each hit from the loop will be slightly panned, so you have to account for that as well. So here, for example, I have some stereo tools again, and I completely monoed this. I could just mono it from FL Studio, but I just decided to use this plugin. It's what I'm used to, I guess. For this one, it sounded relatively centered, so I didn't do any stereo processing on it. So again, the three loops together sound somewhat centered, and if you want, I can play them for you right now. Just a second. Let's see. So there you go. To me, that sounds somewhat centered, so I'm fine with that. And over here, there is no stereo processing, as you can see. So that's pretty much what I do for the drums. Pretty simple. At the end result, what you want is just panning your hi-hats. Um, for example, my offbeat hi-hat, I usually like to keep on mono. If it's somewhat wide by default, I will mono it from here. However, this hi-hat sample was relatively centered, so I kept it that way. As you can see, it's not too wide. Now, this is just to separate them. Now, I have some chorus on there. The chorus naturally widens the sound a little bit, and I did this. I like to try different plugins, so chorus is one of the ways I like to widen some of my sounds. I don't use it on too many of my sounds, so this was more of a trial and error thing that I did here, but it worked, and this is what it sounds like. For example, as you can see, it does sound a bit different. Now for this hi-hat, I didn't do much because it doesn't play with the at the same time as the offbeat hi-hat, so I kept it because I do like it centered. However, I did do some panning on it, and you can see that here. As you can see, I do have some panning on this, so if you can see what it sounds like. Oops, sorry. So as you can see, this is just panning to give a little stereo width to my hi-hats. And if you want to hear this with the open hi-hat, this is what it sounds like. Okay, pretty straightforward. Just basically playing around, to be honest. I don't follow any set rules for my hi-hats, except that in general, the end result, I want it to sound relatively centered, and some supporting loops and hi-hats on the sides. This is just what I like to hear. Now let's move on to the basses. Again, for the basses, I didn't used to follow any specific rules, but what I learned over time is that I usually like to have my sub bass completely mono, and by default, as you can see, I have this on full for some reason, but at the end of the day, I do have our bass stereo on it, and the main reason for that is because really I don't doesn't matter to me where my sub bass highs are. Usually I cut my sub basses around 100 or 150 hertz. And so since I just mentioned that I have TP bass lane on the master, which monos everything on below 100, the sub bass is naturally monoed anyway. So I didn't even bother to play with the stereo knobs here, although this oscillator is turned down just because it was a trial and error sort of thing, I guess. But like I said, sub bass is usually cut at 100 anyway, or 150 for me. So the TP bass line on the master takes care of that. Now for the other layers, it's honestly a trial and error. I mean, I usually play all the sounds together. Well, this is what I did for this track anyway. I played each layer in the mix, and I placed it in the field where I felt it came through the most. And so, for example, for this layer, I have it pretty much all on full stereo, so it's full wideness, 100% wideness, and there is no stereo processing over here, and there is no stereo processing on the bass bus either. Now for the second bass, again, pretty much the same thing. Played all the sounds together, see where it fit, and again, as you can see, it's full wideness, 100%. For the third bass, actually, let me just show you what these sound like. Sorry. So as you can see, this is a high bass, obviously, which is why it's wide. I tend to have my high basses wide usually, and my mid bass is relatively more centered, just to give a little more power to the bass in the center. So these two are probably high basses. The first one is this one is another high bass, or a midish high bass rather. For this one, as you can see, I do have my stereo on 0, 0, and 0 all the way through, so it's completely mono. And as you can hear, it is a mid bass, and like I said, I tend to have my mid basses more centered just to give a little bit more power to the bass and balance the bass sound in general, to fill it out in the center. As you can see, I don't have any stereo processing on here either. For this one, I just used a preset from, I'm not sure which bank this is. However, as you can see, it's not, it's around 75% wide. This oscillator is 100% wide, and this one is 100% wide. And as you can see, this one doesn't really come through as much as the other two oscillators, so it's fine to have it 100% wide. And I believe this is another mid bass, relatively somewhere between a high and a mid bass, I guess. And obviously we already talked about the sub bass. So this takes care of the basses pretty much. Like I said, I don't follow any set rules. However, for this track, I decided to somewhat follow a new approach and have my mid basses more centered and have my my high basses wider. Now, if I just want to compare this to what I used to do before, so for example, in a float, I had my basses right here. This is full stereo, full stereo, full stereo, all the way, full stereo, and this is mono. So even though I have TP bass lane on the master again, on 125 this time, I monoed the silent sub bass anyway, and these are naturally stereo. I don't know where the stereo knob on this is, so I'm not sure where I could have changed that, but I could have added a stereo tools, but like I said, I didn't know the techniques I do now. So like I said, everything is wide here, except the sub bass, and there is nothing somewhat to complement the sub bass in the center. The mid bass is also wide, so I was all over the place with this project, and sun gaze as well. So let's go back to this one. Just want to move on to the pads now. And now for the pads, I tend to follow a little bit more of a systematic way of doing things, especially with this track. First of all, like I said, the first two steps are good EQing and good layering, choosing the right layers and EQing each layer properly. And then I start to place them somewhat in the stereo field. Now, with the pads, you'll see that I paid a little more attention to placing them in the stereo field. So I'm going to show you what I did now. Now, this is the first pad, which I believe is just a warm pad. Let's take a look. Yep. So just a standard warm pad. And for this one, I have it almost 75% wide. And this is the only oscillator that's playing. So it doesn't matter what the other knobs are set to. And over here, I have some delay to widen it a little bit. As you can see, it's ping pong delay. So the pad is not too wide. And the reason is I don't like pads to be, I don't like the main pad to be too wide. And the main reason for that is usually my main pad's playing the intro as well as and the climax. As you'll see here, I do have an intro pad, and it is this same pad that I just showed you. So if it's too wide, it won't really balance with the rest of the elements. And if it's too centered, it won't come through because there are some other elements that will probably overshadow it, I guess. So for me, I tried and I found that around 75% wide was good enough, and the delay took care of widening. Ping pong delay took care of making it even wider because the delay bounces off the sides. And I tend to do that a lot with pads. I always usually tend to have ping pong delay on my pads. Now, moving on to the second layer, is just sorry, it's just probably also another maybe a texture pad. So this is more of a somewhat evolving or phasing sort of texture pad, and for that I decided to have it on full wideness. And again, this is to complement the first pad because this is one of the other main pads that I have. And as you can see, I also have delay on it to sort of smoothen the chords. However, the delay is centered because I have it on maximum wideness here, so it wouldn't really make sense for me to have the delay to be wide as well. And as you can see, oscillator 2 is also 100% wide, and the delay is centered, like I said, so it's panned to the center, and there's no ping pong on it. So this sort of separates the delay given from this pad from the delay I get from this pad to help fill it out a bit more. I'll show you how they all sound like together at the end. Now for this next pad, so as you can see, this is sort of a more gliding, swelling in a way pad, and this is mainly to fill the sides. As you heard, this pad bounces between the sides. It's not the delay, it's actually the pad itself. And for this, I have it on 0 width. Why? Because I automated this pad to bounce between the sides, so I don't want any phasing issues caused by having it bouncing between the sides and having this knob set to maximum wideness. So all the knobs are dead center, even though only oscillator 1 and 2 are playing. So as you can see, this doesn't matter really. Oscillator 2 is on 0 and 1 is on 0 as well. So how do I automate the panning? I just use LFO tool, and oops, just a second. Okay, let me open that again. It's always nice when FL Studio crashes on me. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So as I said, I have LFO tool, and it's set to automate the panning all the way to the sides 100% every 2 bars. So the panning happens from side to side every 2 bars. And like I said, this is mainly to fill the sides of the track. And I have some delay on there as well, pretty standard, just like the other pads. I also have a vocal pad, and this vocal pad is actually a combination of a couple of presets. So, and they're one of my sort of sounds that I like to use in a lot of my tracks. So I don't want to give that one out, to be honest. But it doesn't have a stereo knob in the synthesizer because it's not silent or massive or spire. However, uh, just a second. However, I have some sample delay on it, and basically what that does is it simulates the Haas effect. I believe I covered that in my Sungaze track overview, so if you haven't watched that, please do watch it. I covered what this plugin does, which is basically simulate the Haas effect. So it splits the sound to a left and right signal, and it delays the right signal, I believe, or the left signal, same thing, delays one of the signals by a few milliseconds, which gives you an impression of the sound being extra wide. So let me just show you what that sounds like, and I'll show you what it sounds like without the plugin in a second. So as you can see, it does add a little bit of wideness to it. And this is because honestly, I found that if I had this pad centered, it wasn't coming through as much as I wanted it to, because I already have a lot of other pads, and I really wanted to add this pad, so I just split it, and it seemed to come through a little bit more uh, that way. And again, some delay on the sides. And I think that is about it for the pads. I just have a bass pad here, um, which is just one oscillator here. And how how I usually place this pad is I leave this pad last, to be honest, and then well, I leave the stereo placement of this pad last, and then when I have all my other pad layers placed, I play around with the stereo knob. I've done this actually in a float and Sungaze as well. I play around with the stereo knob until the base layer sort of completes the bottom end of the other pads, if that makes sense. When the entire thing sounds as complete as it can be. So I go all the way from zero all the way up, and where the sweet spot is, where the pads sound the most complete together in terms of low end and high end, I will leave that as the stereo placement for the bass pad. Now, like I said, I have TP bass lane on the master, so it takes care of the low end of this bass pad to be mono. However, I will let the highs of this pad be a little wider. And as you can see, I have a high pass on this pad at just 45, so all the highs are free to come through except those that are limited by the cutoff. And this is what this pad sounds like. So as you can see, it does have some wideness to it. However, the low end of the pad is relatively centered because of the TP bass lane on the master. And that does it for the pads. Now we move on to the plucks. In terms of plucks, like I said, I'd like to move to my project, to my float project. So let me just close this one up. Um, Actually, one last thing I want to cover before in this project before I move on is the effects. Generally, I don't have any. These are the most pretty much loose, if I may say that, loose elements in my track. I don't have any rules at all for effects. If it sounds good, it sounds good. There are no rules. The crashes, usually I'll just have a little bit of delay on them just to fill out the sides, but you can see pretty basic, nothing here. Um, Again, nothing here, just standard stuff, delay on it. And in terms of effects, basically, I'll just add the effects that I want, that I like from sample packs, and then just maybe sometimes pan them to come through a little bit better if they're not coming through when they're just centered. And that's pretty much what I do for all my effects, whether it be crashes, white noise sweeps, even some atmospheric effects. So this, for example, or I don't know, let's say. So as you can see, nothing fancy on there. Um, I do have actually some LFO tool on that, just to bounce between the sides. I think this is a transition effect. So just for added, I guess, tension, I did add some 60% panning from side to side every half a bar. So yeah, nothing fancy. This is just one thing. I mean, I probably didn't do that. Yeah, didn't do that for any of the other effects. So that's it for this project. Now I'll move on to the flow project and we'll take a look at the pads. Sorry, the plucks. Okay, so now for the plucks, I already have it set up here. I have four main pluck layers. Two of them I believe I made myself. This one was sent to me by a preset sent to me by a friend of mine, Savid, many years ago, a couple of years ago, I think. And this one, I believe, is just taken from the FSS Definitive Silent Definitive Collection Sound Bank. And I did modify it as I usually do with any preset that I use. I always tweak it, modify it. I never really use plugins straight from the sample pack. Sound bank. So yeah, this one's pretty standard. Now let's start with the general sound and what they sound like together. So as you can see, pretty nice full sound in a way. It's not my best, but one of my best probably. So for this, like I said, there are four layers. The first layer, I did actually place my pay attention to placing my plucks in this track. Not much else though. So as you can see, this one is set to zero stereo. All the way, all oscillators are set to zero. This one is full, but there isn't anything coming through from here because of the voices. So this one is more centered, and this is what it sounds like. Okay. Now for this one, I probably have it on maximum stereo. Yeah, there we go, maximum stereo here. There's nothing coming out of here because of the voices, so these don't matter. But it's maximum stereo over here. I'll double check the mixer channels in a second. For this one, also maximum stereo. These don't matter because of the voices. And for the last one, it is a tap luck. So what I mean by a tap luck is I added this layer strictly to give the pluck sounds a little bit more tap to them, a little bit more attack, punchiness in a way. So there is no delay on this because there's delay on all other three layers already. So yeah. So this one is mainly just for the tap, and it's centered because, like I said, it's pretty much the same concept as my mid basses. The mid basses, my mid basses have the most tap to them or most attack, punch, pitch modulation. Usually, as you can see here, is what does the job. So usually, what I do is I have the more plucky, attacky layers centered to give more power to the sound instead of being wide. There's nothing, well, little things, not too many things that sound as bad as a white plucky sound. And let's take a look if I have any other stereo imaging here. Nothing here, nothing here, nothing here, and nothing here. So pretty much like I said, and nothing on the bus either. So pretty much like I said, just the synthesizer knobs. And how I did that is basically just again play all the layers together and tweak one by one until you get that sound that you want, until each layer comes through well, and until all the layers sort of work together in a good way. Because if you actually have this on full, it might sound weaker, even though there are four layers. They might sound weaker with, for example, this one on maximum stereo. Now I'll go back to the mono, sorry, compatibility. Now, what I never really used to check what my tracks sound like in mono. Honestly, up until this new track that I just showed you before. And the reason is I didn't know simply that most clubs have mono sound systems. And by most, I do mean most. I'm talking about 95% plus, I think, as far as I know at least, of clubs have mono sound systems. So really, what you want to do is usually periodically check what your track sounds like in mono every time you add maybe let's say two or three elements. So if I add maybe a couple of plucks, I'll check how they sound in mono. And the reason is you want every sound to come through in mono. It will sound worse in general. I'm not talking about the sound itself. I'm talking about the track in general. It won't sound as pleasing as it does in stereo. However, if every sound is coming through properly in mono, then you're good to go. Now, you should pay special attention to hi-hats and let's say high-end based sounds in general, especially hi-hats and loops, because incorrect stereo placement of these or too much stereo processing of these might lead to phasing. And how you can detect phasing is mostly through mono when checking your track in mono. You'll notice that hi-hats or loops or whatever sound is phasing will sound a little bit wishy-washy. I guess I don't know how else to explain it. It will just sound like basically a 64 or 32 kbps MP3 being played at you. You'll notice a considerable lack of quality in the hi-hats, and that's how you know pretty much it's sort of a flanging effect in a way, and that's how you know that your sound is phasing. Now, what you can do to fix that is play around with the panning of that sound or check to see if you're doing too much stereo processing. So maybe you're widening the sound a lot, or you added chorus where on the sound where you didn't need to. And in that case, you can solve it pretty easily before it reaches the mastering phase, and you can get rid of that phasing pretty easily. So what I did in this last track, let me just load it up again just for a second. Sorry. I believe we're done with the float, so I'll just close it up. I'm going to play a little bit of my track. Like I said, it's not finished, but I'm going to show you what it sounds like in stereo, and I'm going to show you what it also sounds like in mono, just so you can get an idea of how it should, not should sound, but how it could sound, I guess, if there were no phasing issues. Now, I want to say this though. Um, I use for this track, like I said, I did a lot of new stuff or new techniques I used that I didn't used to use before, and this is one of them. I tend to check how my track sounds in mono after the end of every production session. Rather, I don't really do it often while actually producing. So within two, I mean, when you add two to three sounds, that's being cautious. However, if you do check it at the end of every production session, let's say after every hour, maybe check to see how your track sounds in mono while producing. So maybe you'll be able to narrow down any problem issues that might come up in terms of you'll know what elements you added, so you might know what you need to fix, etc. So I'll just play a little bit of the track here in stereo first, and then I'll play it in mono as well, and then I'll show you what the pads sound like because I haven't showed you that yet. So let's see. All right, so sounds pretty okay in stereo, I guess. I just like to show you what the basses sound like in mono, in stereo, because I haven't showed you what all the layers sound like together. So this is what the layers sound like. So as you can see, it does sound balanced in terms of right and left. However, it is a little wide and it is also a little centered in a balanced way, which I like. Obviously, it's not the best, but I'm happy with the result for now. Now for the mono section, let's listen to that same part in mono again. Sorry about that. And it starts speaking from here because I'm filming this, so it takes a lot of CPU. But yeah, you can see that everything's coming through pretty well, in my opinion at least. In that intro section. I could play the rest, but it'll peak. But just take my word for it; it sounds okay. But yeah, so this is what it sounds like. This is what I do after the end of every production session, or if I'm going on every 2 3 hours of production, I do it every hour maybe. So this is just something to keep in mind if you want your tracks played in the club, or at least have the option to be played in the club, I guess, and sound good. Now for the pads, I'll just show you what the pads sound like in the breakdown, just so you can get an idea of um, you know how each let's say layer is taking its own space in the mix. So as you can hear, in my opinion, I like how each layer is coming through, and as you can see, that pad that has the panning automation on it is filling up the sides pretty nicely, especially when the cutoff goes up. So that's pretty much it, honestly, for this tutorial. I hope you guys got something out of this, even though it was a little unorganized, well, less organized than my other tutorials, but I did this one in a hurry because I had a lot of people, sort of urging me to do it as soon as I can. So I hope you got something out of it. And like I said, this is still work in progress for me. I'm still working on my stereo placement skills. But if you compare, if you check how your track sounds in mono every so often, you'll get an ear for it pretty soon. And like I said, following these general guidelines in a way will help you sort of have a starting point, at least for placing your sounds correctly in the stereo field. So anyways, I hope you guys got something out of this tutorial, and please let me know what you think of it, or if you have any other questions in the comment section, and feel free to share it, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And also, if you feel like there should be a topic that I should cover in a coming tutorial, please do let me know in the comment section. I'll be happy to cover it. I did say this before. I'm mainly looking for topics that haven't been covered much on YouTube, or haven't been covered at all for that matter, whether on YouTube or any other production, let's say blog or forum, etc. So if you have any of those topics, please do let me know and I'll try to get to it. Or if you have any other topics as well that may have been discussed before, but not as elaborate way as you'd like, please do let me know as well, and I'll see if I can get to it. Until next time, I'll talk to you guys later, and thank you for watching.